Good evening. President Xi Jinping has told Hong Kong and Macau to stick to the one country, two systems principle while speaking at celebrations for the 15th anniversary of Macau's handover. Xi warned the two SARs that they'll find their left foot in the right shoe if they stray from the principle. Emily Seal reports.
Macau was handed back to China from the Portuguese exactly 15 years ago today, 2 years after Hong Kong's handover. To celebrate the occasion, President Xi Jinping reiterated Beijing's unswerving commitment to the one country, two systems principle in both SARs. We must both adhere to the one China principle and respect the differences of the two systems, Xi stressed. Both uphold the power of the central government and ensure a high degree of autonomy in the SARs. But the president warned that at no time should we focus only on one side and neglect the other. This is the only way leading to sound and steady progress. Otherwise, a misguided approach from the beginning, just like putting one's left foot into the right shoe, would lead us to nowhere. She also called on people to guard against and oppose external infiltration and interference to ensure the stability and unity in the SAR. Xi's comments came after the end of the so-called umbrella movement in Hong Kong, where pro-democracy protesters blocked streets for 79 days to demand Beijing lift restrictions in its framework for the 2017 chief executive poll. Demonstrators accused the National People's Congress Standing Committee of ruling out any chances of a free election in the SAR, insisting Hong Kong has the authority to come up with its own electoral system under the one country, two systems principle. Xi's shoe analogy today was interpreted by some as Beijing putting its foot down on how much democracy Hong Kong can have, hinting that any autonomy the SAR has is derived from the central government. In other words, both one country and two systems have equal weight and should be considered as a whole. No one should separate the phrase or put one side above the other. The president's remark on external forces was also seen by some as a warning towards foreign countries who allegedly funded the Occupy protests and tried to interfere with China's internal politics. His comments came after Beijing denied entry to Hong Kong last month to a group of British MPs who wanted to follow up on the interpretation of the 1984 Sino-British Joint Declaration. She arrived in Macau yesterday afternoon for a two-day visit, but is giving Hong Kong a miss despite it being only 1 hour away by ferry. Some see the move as a snub and sign of Beijing's displeasure with the Occupy protests.
As well as handover celebrations in Macau today, the new government was officially sworn in. President Xi Jinping told the city to diversify its economic development so it's less dependent on the gambling industry. The day began with Macau officials gathering at Lotus Square for the flag-raising ceremony. Then it was off to the East Asian Games Dome. A number of Hong Kong officials, including Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying and his wife Regina Tong, and Financial Secretary John Tsang and Secretary for Justice Rimsky-Yun, were also spotted in the audience. Macau's 15th anniversary of its return to China also marks the inauguration of the Special Administrative Region's fourth government. Fernando Choi first took to the stage to be sworn in for a second term as chief executive under the watch of President Xi Jinping. In August's election, Choi stood uncontested and secured 96% of votes from the 400-strong election committee, although there was also a record number of blank or invalid votes and absentees. After that, his new cabinet ministers were sworn in. In a major reshuffle, only the Commissioner of Audit Ho Feng-an was given a second term. In his speech, Choi promised to improve the livelihood of the Macau people and push for greater social justice under the one country, two systems policy. President Xi Jinping wrapped up the ceremony with his own speech, urging Macau to work on solving its deep-rooted conflicts and said development risks have built up over the years. Xi said the region should work on diversifying its economic development, a hint that Macau shouldn't focus so much on the gambling industry, which its economy relies heavily on. As the ceremony wrapped up, Xi walked over to greet Leung. In the afternoon, Xi visited the University of Macau's Hengqin campus. Then he was sent off on his flight back to Beijing by colorful crowds. But not everyone was celebrating today. Across town, a number of organizations marked the handover anniversary with protests and demands for universal suffrage in the 2019 chief executive elections. The march ended at the Macau government headquarters. A pro-Beijing group has called on the government to legislate the controversial Article 23, blaming the Occupy protests on the lack of national security laws in Hong Kong. Chief Secretary Carrie Lam, meanwhile, urged those who have been staging shopping protests in Mongkok to stop. Here's Emily Siu.
The government's point woman on political reform today says society needs to be harmonious for businesses to thrive. Lam referred to the ongoing shopping protests organized by Occupy supporters following the clearance of the mass sit-ins in Mongkok, Admiralty and Causeway Bay. The chief secretary said although it's normal for different people to have different opinions on the topic of constitutional development, she said such views must be expressed legally and peacefully. Lam called on protesters to stop trying to get their message across via illegal occupation or engaging in acts that disrupt the daily lives of shop staff and residents. The government's number 2 made the comments while attending the opening ceremony of a shopping festival. She urged the public to spend money during the Christmas holidays, particularly in Mongkok and Tsim Sha Tsui, as shops and restaurants in those areas were most affected by the 79-day street blockades. In a related development, members of the pro-Beijing groups Caring Hong Kong Power and Voice of Loving Hong Kong hosted a forum on the busy Sai Yung Choi Street in Mongkok this afternoon. The groups are calling on the government to legislate Article 23 of the Basic Law as soon as possible to restore harmony in the SAR. They argued the reason why the Occupy mass protests emerged was due to the lack of the national security laws. The groups also accused pan-Democrat lawmakers of receiving funds from external forces to fuel the Occupy protests and disrupt social order. The controversial Article 23 prohibits any act of treason, secession, sedition and subversion against the central government. Last time the government tried to roll out the bill was back in 2003, and the move triggered 500,000 people to take their protest against the proposal to the streets and led to the resignation of former Chief Executive Tong Chi-hua.
Police Commissioner Andy Zhang says Occupy protest organizers will be dealt with first out of hundreds of people arrested during the demonstrations. Zhang also urged anyone wanting to protest during the Christmas holidays to do so peacefully and legally. Ann Chang reports.
Nearly 1,000 people were arrested during the 79-day Occupy movement that paralyzed major parts of the city. For the first time since the protests, Police Commissioner Andy Zhang sat down with the media today for an in-depth question and answer session on the matter. Zhang said there are many investigations going on, and the protest organizers will be dealt with first. He added that the process will take time, but an initial report should be ready within 3 months. The final decision on whether to prosecute will rest with the Department of Justice. When asked if police using batons to beat protesters was the lowest form of restraint, the police commissioner didn't reply directly, but said officers did not intend to hurt anyone, and they have the experience and professionalism to handle such matters. Zhang added that he was very touched at the sight of a female officer using her body to shield pro-democracy protesters from harm on the 3rd of October, comparing the scene to a loving mother protecting her child. Zhang defended officers who came under fire for taking pictures at protest sites, saying there's no reason why officers shouldn't do so when everyone else does. He also warned that police will not turn a blind eye to shopping tour protesters who use shopping as an excuse to demonstrate in crowds because they threaten public safety. Zhang stressed that people do want to celebrate the upcoming holidays and urged those wanting to protest to do so peacefully and lawfully. He said officers will be deployed in different locations and will take action with restraint if necessary. Meanwhile, Zhang said the 7 officers who beat up Civic Party activist Ken Zhang during the protests have been arrested and criminal investigations are underway. Ann Chang, ATV News.
Former Chief Secretary Raphael Hui has spent his first night in prison after being found guilty yesterday of receiving bribes while in office. This morning, he was visited at the Lai Chi Kok Reception Center by his wife, Teresa Low. She told reporters her husband plans to appeal the charges and will apply for legal aid since he was declared bankrupt earlier this year. She quoted her husband as saying it was very cold at the facility. Low lamented that Hui was a big spender, but pointed out that she wisely kept her finances separate from his and advised other couples to do the same. The government may prosecute ATV for not paying its staff and is currently seeking legal advice on the matter. Arthur Akiola reports.
Concern about ATV's nearly 3-week delay in paying staff their November salaries has reached the city's labor chief. Matthew Chung said today that the government is looking into the possibility of taking legal action against the station. He said the administration is consulting the Justice Department on what action can be taken and will proceed according to the law. Chung said it's a serious matter and pointed out that just yesterday, the boss of a cleaning company was jailed for 5 months for not paying staff wages. They were one of 5 employers jailed this year for the offense, which carries a maximum penalty of 3 years in prison and a $350,000 fine. On Monday, the Labor Department's director will visit ATV to assist its employees in getting their salaries. The department's staff will also explain how to apply for wages from the insolvency fund should the company fold. Daily news broadcasts at the station may stop from the 1st of January if staff are not paid by the end of the month, which would be a violation of its licensing conditions. Arthur Akiola, ATV News.
An Australian mother has been arrested on suspicion of killing 8 children found dead in her home in northern Queensland yesterday. The woman, who is recovering in hospital from stab wounds, is under guard and speaking with police. Joyce Wu reports.
Locals laid flowers and lit candles at a makeshift shrine in the city of Cairns today. The local community is still reeling from the shock of yesterday's mass stabbing of 8 children in the popular tourist spot. Police now say they have arrested the mother of 7 of the 8 children. However, she has not been formally charged.
The 37-year-old mother of several of the children involved in this incident has been arrested for murder overnight and is currently under police guard at the Cairns Base Hospital.
The police say they don't have any other suspects. The children were aged between 18 months and 14 years. Forensics teams had completed their investigation and the children's bodies have been removed from the house.
We've located a number of weapons. Once again, our very, very good scientists will be looking at those weapons, and at some stage we'll be able to determine if we have the weapon was used. We're talking about edged weapons, knives.
Prime Minister Tony Abbott has called the event in Cairns heartbreaking and said these are trying days for Australia.
Thousands of passengers have been left stranded at Sydney Airport today due to a computer glitch. But first in our world wrap, U.S. President Barack Obama says Sony's decision to pull a movie after online threats was a mistake, while North Korea has offered to investigate the hacking of the company.
After coming under fire for its decision to shelve the satirical comedy The Interview, Sony Pictures is now saying it's going to release the film after all.
There are a number of options open to us, and we have considered those and are considering them. As it stands right now, while there have been a number of suggestions that we go out there and deliver this movie digitally or through VOD, there has not been one major VOD, video-on-demand distributor, one major e-commerce site that has stepped forward and said they are willing to distribute this movie for us.
This comes after President Barack Obama said the entertainment giant's move is a mistake.
I am sympathetic to the concerns that they faced. Having said all that, yes, I think they made a mistake. I wish they'd spoken to me first. I would have told them, do not get into a pattern in which you're intimidated by these kinds of criminal attacks.
Obama spoke a few hours after the FBI formally accused the North Korean government of being responsible for the hacking attack against Sony. There was a tense standoff when scores of people protesting police violence met dozens rallying in support of New York City officers in Manhattan.
You'll go silent?
At times, the demonstrators on opposing sides confronted each other, exchanging insults.
We're not against all of NYPD, but the bad cops, they need what they do,
unjustified killings of unarmed black youth and men, they need to be held accountable. And at this point, they are not being held accountable for their actions. And it's absolutely unacceptable.
You know, it's not right. These people want a world with no police officers, with no law. It's going to turn into the Wild West, and that just can't happen.
It was one of the first counter-rallies by police supporters since the chokehold death of Eric Gardner, a black man who officers were trying to arrest in July. In Australia, large queues of travellers formed at Sydney Airport after a computer problem disrupted operations at Australian budget airline Jetstar. Thousands of passengers travelling for the Christmas holidays were affected.
I've got another flight to catch, which was tight anyway, international, and now I'm going to miss that flight too.
Well, we're in Bali. We were meant to fly straight to Adelaide, but that flight was cancelled for some reason, so I think I put on a flight here to Sydney, and now we're waiting here for another 4 hours before we can go to Adelaide.
The airline says parts of the system are now back online, but flights are still subject to delays.
On the mainland, a cyclist cheated death after being run over by a lorry in Zhejiang province. But first, at least 6 people died in a 5-car collision that ended in flames in Sichuan province. Ann Chang reports.
A 5-car pileup at 9 o'clock this morning resulted in a fire on the Tangshan section of the motorway that links Chengdu and Nanchang. Teams of firefighters rushed to the scene to battle flames from a burning truck. At least 6 people were killed in the road accident in Sichuan province. 57 firefighters and 19 fire engines were deployed to the scene. There was a close shave for this cyclist who was hit by a 14-wheeler lorry on Wednesday in Ningbo City, Zhejiang province. The cyclist ended up under the truck after being pushed off his bike. But miraculously, he survived and was sitting up looking dazed and confused when the truck drove on without bothering to stop. Emergency service workers who treated him at the scene said he only suffered some minor bruises. Authorities said the truck driver was at fault for failing to notice the cyclist in the blind spot when turning right. Ann Chang, ATV News.
Sports news. Olympic gold medal winning swimmer Michael Phelps has managed to avoid jail time after pleading guilty to a drink driving charge. Bo Leung reports.
U.S. swimming champion Michael Phelps has been given a 1-year suspended jail sentence after pleading guilty to drink driving. Phelps, the most decorated Olympian ever, was also sentenced to 18 months of supervised probation. The 18-time Olympic gold medalist failed a breathalyzer test after he was caught speeding in his hometown of Baltimore in September. The 29-year-old was nearly twice the legal limit when he was driving at 135 kilometers per hour in a 72-kilometer zone.
I'm happy to be moving forward, and you know, I'll continue to grow from this and continue on my path of recovery. And you know, the next couple of years are going to be very challenging. I'm very pleased and happy that I have the great support that I have around me.
Phelps came out of retirement earlier this year, but was given a 6-month ban from swimming following his arrest in September. In ice hockey, Detroit Red Wings took the lead after netting the opening period against the New York Islanders. But New York made it 1-1 after Brock Nelson scored late in the period. Anders Lee scored his 6th goal of the year for the Islanders, who held on to win 2-1. Finally, Gabriel Medina has become the first Brazilian to win the Surfing World Championship Tour title at Pipe Masters in Hawaii. Here we go. The 20-year-old finished 2nd place in the competition, but had already clinched the world crown when he advanced into the quarterfinals, and title contender Mick Fanning of Australia was eliminated. In winning, Medina now joins Kelly Slater as one of the 2 youngest world champions ever. Slater, who was knocked out in the 3rd round, won his first of 11 titles in 1992.
The weather forecast for the next few days: more fine and dry conditions tomorrow. Temperatures will range from 13 to 19 degrees. It's going to be cold on Monday morning, and expect cloudy weather in the following couple of days. Here's a look at the weather around the world. Thanks for watching ATV. I'm Wynna Wong. Good night.
Coming up, a window on.